Good evening. I'm Lori Robichaud, the Executive Director of Grua Center. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's conversation. Grua Center's mission is to engage community via arts and culture, and we do so by presenting a variety of concerts, art exhibitions, and speakers on a wide range of topics. We are now presenting those events as best we can on digital platforms like tonight on Zoom. We usually start with a little housekeeping. I'm coming to you from Grua's office, and our program director, Kelly Rocherol, is behind the scenes from her home office. And we are going to move on here as best we can. Right now, one of our panelists is having some trouble getting on. That's the Zoom world, that's the COVID world, so we're hoping that she'll be able to join us. Our discussion will be recorded and available on Grua Center's YouTube channel in the next week or so. This is also the time when I take a moment to thank the many people who donate to Grua Center's annual fund each year. I know some of you are with us tonight. Those gifts are such a big part of making our year-round programming possible, and those annual fund dollars matter more than ever during this time of COVID when many of our usual activities are curtailed and we can't gather together in person. But now on to our presentation. We are delighted to partner for the first time with the Jewish Federation of Eastern Connecticut in bringing their exhibition, Stories of Resilience, Encountering Racism, to Grua Center. I had the pleasure of being in the audience for a version of this talk back in February when the exhibit opened at the Lyman Allen Art Museum in New London. This is an exhibit about stories, and several of the subjects of that exhibit are with us tonight to tell their stories to us virtually, in person. We are grateful to the Lyman Allen for their help in mounting our exhibit, and to the Dominion Energy Charitable Foundation for their financial support. We are even more grateful to Tammy Kay, the Jewish Federation's program manager, who we worked so closely with to mount the exhibit in our space, and to Jerry Fisher, the recently retired, a loose word, he doesn't act retired to me, and the longtime executive director of the Jewish Federation, who is instrumental in making this exhibit happen and who will moderate tonight's discussion. But chiefly, we send our deepest thanks to tonight's panelists, Lonnie Braxton and Florence Clarke, who are with us, and we hope Donetta Hodge will be with us shortly, for their willingness to share their artifacts with us in the exhibit and to share their stories, including some remembrances that I imagine are not that easy to retell. As our country goes through a renewed emphasis on how we might overcome racism, there's a noteworthy quote by the author James Baldwin that surely can help guide us. He says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." That's our reminder that in order for us to change the future, we must continue to face our history. And that's where our conversation will begin tonight. So I now pass it off to Jerry, who will tell us a little bit about how this particular project came about, and he'll chat with our panelists about their experiences. So welcome, Jerry. Please take it away.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you very, very much. It's my pleasure to join all of you tonight and to share stories with you, very powerful stories. I want to give you a bit of a background of how this all came about. Many, many years ago, there was a movement across the United States that was attempting to deny the fact that the Holocaust ever happened. Holocaust denial was gaining traction, and in response to that, the Jewish Federation of Eastern Connecticut opened the Zygmunt and Rose Trochlitz Holocaust Resource Center. And we provided teaching materials on the Holocaust to schools throughout the area, literally tens of schools. We went from that to a program called Encountering Survivors, where we wanted students to meet with survivors and hear their live stories, because we thought that was the best way to counter Holocaust denial. Now these students are meeting with children of survivors because, sadly, the survivor generation is pretty much gone in our area. But the children of survivors are carrying on the important work. Several years ago, New London High School athletic teams were visiting area high schools some not too far from New London, as well as some up in the northeast corner, and were encountering racial taunts. And we were very upset about that. And some of my friends were equally upset that the schools did not seem to be doing anything serious about it. So we at the Federation decided to take our model of encountering survivors and begin a program where African Americans in New London or Waterford can meet with students and tell their story to the students. Now, when we did Encountering Survivors, we learned that the most important thing was for students to visit the homes of the mentors. Students had never been in a Jewish home. So they would walk into the home, and we started to tell the hosts, you don't have to only talk about the Holocaust. You could put out Jewish objects and tell people about those objects. We wanted to do the same thing with the African American families. We wanted these students, in almost all cases, all white students, to go into the homes of African Americans or into their offices and see them live. And we've succeeded. There are 4 people that are in the exhibit, Encountering Differences, Stories of Resilience, Encountering Racism. There's Lonnie Braxton, Florence Clarke, Donetta Hodge, and Merle Smith, who was the first African-American graduate of the Coast Guard Academy. His story was told by his wife, Linda Smith, but she could not be with us tonight because she's a therapist. She has group and individual therapy sessions, and in the stress of COVID, she could not break those sessions. I will toss in a few stories from Merle Smith as the evening goes on. But before I continue, I want to thank the Grua Center for taking our exhibit and putting it up and going the extra mile to make sure the community could see it. We were very proud of what we accomplished, and we had schools booked to go to this exhibit. We would have had over 900 students going through the exhibit at the Lyman Allen, and God knows how many adults. And then the pandemic hit, and we were closed down. And La Grua is giving us a second life and a second chance, and is also putting us into a different type of a community where the story will be heard and seen by people who might not have otherwise heard about this at all. So it's with a great deal of gratitude towards the La Grua Center and towards Lori for helping us to set up this exhibit. It looks absolutely beautiful in the center. Tomorrow we're doing a docent training, and then they're going to be open for gallery hours. And I encourage you all to come to see the exhibit. I'm going to, in a sense, follow what we do when the students come to visit with their mentors. And I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So Lonnie, you're up first. Can you share with us what might have been your most significant childhood experience that had a bearing on your resilience and your success today? Unmute. You have to unmute. You have to unmute.
Sorry.
And tell them a little bit of who you are and what you do before you go on.
My name is Lonnie Braxton. I was born in Greenville, Mississippi, a very long time ago. It's a town right on the Mississippi River. I'm the oldest of 2 children born to Lonnie and Nora Braxton. And my parents, when they got married, they were sharecroppers. And as a result of having worked a whole year, finding themselves in a hole, my father told my mother, if we don't get off this place now, we'll never leave. So he loaded all of their belongings on a wagon with 2 mules and left that plantation, thankfully so. So I was born in the town of Greenville, Mississippi. Now, addressing that question, You know, when I think about it, there are two incidents, but one of the incidents really involves a little boy who figured out from what his parents had been telling him the impact that race can have on your life at a very early age. I'm about 5 years old, and down the street from my house, probably a couple of thousand yards, was a place called the Curb Mart. They sold fresh fruits and vegetables. And kids would sit out under a tree on this log and they would shell peas, and they would, you know, housewives would come in and people would buy all this stuff fresh. Well, these people had a small child, and this child would go around punching, because all the kids out there were black and the people who owned this place were white. This kid would punch and kick and call us all kinds of rude names. So my parents had said to me, you don't want to work there. But since my friends were working there, I had to work there. So I kept bugging them and said, okay. And in the process, I'm sitting out there on a log shelling peas. The little kid comes along, starts kicking me and calling me the N-word. Me, I turn around, hit the kid, knock him down. So he cries, runs into his parents. They fire me. I had made 6 cents for that, all that shelling of the peas, which I gladly spent in the store. Came home, told my parents what happened, and they then have to explain to me again about their rules that you can live by, but the rules that will also save your life. And that, I think, was my first true encounter that I could figure out how race was going to impact me all of my life. But coupled with that, when I was 3 years old, my parents took me downtown shopping, and my mother was pregnant with my sister. And we were separated. So all of a sudden, 2 people who had a child they had waited 14 years to have are in a panic because I am lost. So my father and mother are trying to figure out what to do. Now, they had parked this vehicle. They came downtown in a great distance away from where we're shopping in this store. So my mother said, I will continue to look. You go home, no cell phones, and get some other people so we can find him. Now, people are walking around looking at this little lost child. No one said anything. When my father got back to the truck, I was waiting at the truck for my parents. And they said to me, you're going to be okay. And from that moment, I don't think I ever feared anything else. That I always knew I would be resilient enough to make it on my own. Because the tools they had already empowered me with and given me was a kind of foundation that I could rise no matter how crushed.
Thank you, Lonnie. Florence.
Good evening, everyone. I am a native of Charleston, South Carolina. Growing up at a time of Jim Crow. So one of the privileges that I had, and I counted a privilege to be able to share with the young people who were under my mentorship, I had the opportunity to tell them about Jim Crow, specifying that Jim Crow was not a bird. There are a couple of instances, and I thought Lonnie was going to tell my story, and I'm saying, oh, thank you, Lonnie. But one of a significant childhood experience that I had was when I was 6 years old, and basically my first day going to elementary school. I had gone to an Episcopalian kindergarten, but now it was time to enter a public school. Prior to that, the kids in the neighborhood played together. At that point, white kids and black kids, we were colored then, we played together. My best friend happened to be a white girl. So the first day of school, naturally, I went to a segregated school and she went to the all-white school. At the end of the day, when we returned back in the streets, because that's what we played in primarily, we didn't have but one playground that was so far away from us, we could hardly get there. And so I was so happy to explain to her, you know, what happened in my school and my first day. And she said to me, she said, I can't play with you anymore. So I said, well, why? She said, because you're an N. And I felt so much pain, so much hurt that I literally punched her. I beat her up because I wanted her to experience what I was feeling. And from that day on, we were never, ever able to play again. But I really wanted to beat her up. I can't say good enough. Maybe that was good trouble. But I did beat her up so she would understand the pain that I was experiencing. The second incident was everything was segregated. The F.W. Woolworths, Five and Dime, they used to call them back when I was growing up, where the lunch counters were all white. You could the blacks could go in and buy everything, but you couldn't sit at the lunch counter to get a hamburger or anything. So I went in. I was not with my grandmother. I can't remember an adult I went with, but I went in the back of the store and I saw water fountains. And one was labeled white and one was labeled colored. So I pondered that and I drank from the white water fountain. And when I got home, I told my grandmother, and she was so fearful. She said, "You shouldn't do that. You can get in trouble." I said, "Why? Who wants to drink colored water?" And so from that experience, I went forth and resilience. I was not going to accept that.
And now the third fight story of the evening will be from Donetta Hodge. And the bravery of all three of these people started in their youth. Donetta, you're up. One or two experiences from your childhood.
Yes, thank you, Jerry. Good evening to all. I was about the same age. I was born in Kansas City, Kansas. My dad was in the Navy. He had re-enlisted at the time we decided to move to Connecticut. So the most significant experience that I had as a result of that was once we arrived in Connecticut, the Navy assigned us housing. And due to my age, I had to be registered in school. And so I was registered. I don't really recall but one incident, and I think that's all it really took, that took place at the school. I can still vividly recall the incident that happened one day during dismissal for recess. All of us emptied out the classroom, and I remember running along the perimeter of the playground, looking for the dandelion weeds, or some call them blowheads. You blow them and the seeds go everywhere. I remember reaching the area where the dandelion weeds were before others in the class. And in doing so, I was called the N-word by a white boy who seemed to be upset because I reached the area before him. I also recall the gasping of breath by some of my classmates that heard that particular pronouncement. I was unaware of what the word meant. I'd never heard it before. I had not previously heard it before. But I recall thinking that I must tell my mom about this boy and what he called me and what did it mean. Later, I realized that this was W.E. Du Bois in his reference to the color line or opportunities and so forth, or maybe the veil. I later realized that others saw me in a different light, that one doesn't, one doesn't include, what doesn't happen is, my train of thought there was a little different. I think I'm going to change it and say I chose to ignore what was happening at that particular time. It was a shutout of a world that people of color were not entitled to view, is what I basically learned from that. Unfortunately, I had been exposed yet unaware of racism early on. For me, racism most likely began with the burning, probably, of my great aunt's home in Arkansas during a family visit there. And then, of course, later from Kansas to Connecticut, not realizing our lives were subject to hate crimes, particularly in traveling after sundown. We could not purchase food, neither gasoline at some of the places, nor restrooms could we use. So those were the type of experiences that some were immediate, others were uncovered until later that we learned about.
Okay, Lonnie, you're gonna start as we're all growing up here. What was the most important young adult moment for you where you began to feel that you were empowered and were able to cope successfully with racism? What was the young adult transformative moment?
Well, I thinking
That could
about
go to
that.
teenager. It could go to teenager if you wanted to.
Oh, I'm a teenager.
Okay.
And after watching too many John Wayne movies, I decided that I needed to join the Navy and do my share for this country. So I'm bugging my parents about signing up, let me into the Navy. So they held me off for a year. I sign up, I join the Navy. High school comes, I'm 18, I go on active duty. I'm in Norfolk, Connecticut, in my uniform. And the Vietnam War is raging. People are dodging the draft. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And I go to rent a place. And the guy says to me, there were three of us. There were two white sailors and myself. We were all in the same duty section. And one guy had a car, so we all could ride to the ship back and forth with this guy. And we're all in the rental office together. They rent to these two guys and tell me no, that we don't rent to black folk. So I went back to my ship and I filed a formal complaint. And that told me I had the power to do something about it.
Mm.
And growing up in Mississippi and watching what my parents were doing in the civil rights movement and everything, those are my parents. But it finally came my turn and I had to do something.
Lawrence?
Jerry, I think my turn came after attending all black elementary, all black high school. The books that we were using, the backs were, particularly in elementary school, most of the books didn't have backs on them because all of the secondhand books and everything that was discarded from the white schools were shipped to the black schools. I had teachers then who began to instill certain thoughts, certain sense of worth. One of the things they taught was that it didn't matter about the covers of the book. It mattered what was inside the pages. The cover didn't matter. So from there, I was able to, by this time, both of my parents were dead. My dad died when I was 9 years old. My mom died when I was 15 years old. So I had to go and live with my grandfather's sister. And I took a City of Charleston scholarship. They gave 10 scholarships to South Carolina State and 10 to the University of South Carolina so that Black kids would not be able to go to the University of South Carolina. So I won one of the scholarships to attend South Carolina State College. My beginning of my sophomore year, they had the first sit-in in North Carolina. I believe South Carolina State was either the second or the third college, Black college, that planned and carried out a sit-in. My moment was when I decided to march that day downtown Orangeburg, South Carolina, and say that enough was enough. It was time for a change. We were determined to go and sit at the lunch counter at F.W. Woolworth. And we, about 700 kids, under the leadership of James Clyburn, who is now Nancy Pelosi's right-hand man, I call her. He was the student leader at the time. And I made a personal decision that I was going to participate in the Civil Rights March and change things. The first day, we surprised everybody. We took everyone by surprise and we marched down. I remember a white lady ran out of one of the stores and her retort to us was, where did all these ends come from? I personally felt that. I got out of the line and I was getting ready to let her know that that was not my name. And one of the other kids grabbed me back and says, you can't do that. We are about nonviolence. And so that day I tell everybody that I was baptized in nonviolence. And they said to me, if you can't stand the heat, you get out of the kitchen. So we marched, we turned around and went back to the campus. The second day, we did the same thing, except this time they were prepared for us. They called in sheriffs and policemen from some of the other small towns. But the major thing was the fire department was there. And that was the day that they let loose on us with the water hose. And I can't describe the burning, the feeling from the water, the pressure of the water hitting a person. We thought we had strategy. There was a blind girl. We put in the front of the line because we thought that no one would hurt a blind person. The force from the water hose picked her up and she was bouncing on top of it like a ball. So we really knew that we were in trouble then. We were finally arrested, over 700 and some odd kids. There was no jail big enough to hold all of us, so they took us to the fairground where they had animal cages, and they placed us in the animal cages. We were wet. They didn't feed us all day, so the school refectory sent food and threw it to us over the top of the cages. Eventually, we were taken to the city courthouse, and eventually the NAACP of Orangeburg, South Carolina, paid bond for us to be released. So that was my adult moment, my young adult moment, leading into some other things that I would do later on as an adult.
Donetta, what happened to you as a young adult that turned you around? Donetta?
I think she's
Frozen.
Yeah.
She's frozen. Okay, I can speak a little bit about Merle Smith. One of the threads that, Donetta, are you there now?
I am. I'm experiencing high winds, so I'm sorry about that.
Okay, can you tell us very briefly one young adult moment that turned you around, that made you think, I can do this and I'm going to go forward?
Sure. I think that after I reached the point in my life where I was about to graduate from high school, I was proud to learn that I had been accepted to a college where I was interested in communications and media studies. However, I now am informed by my dad that he would not be supporting college. So now we've got sexism in the loop. I had studied business courses and college prep courses in high school, but after realizing I would not be receiving any assistance from home to attend college, this was a very demoralizing moment for me, which meant I would have to further my education on my own, and it could take years. My father had the means, he owned property, but even with the redlining situation, he still probably could have afforded me to go to college for 4 years and thereafter. But he had the means and he refused to do it. And so that left me with trying to find a job. That was the thing that I needed to do. And I was fortunate because I was within walking distance of a job. And the name of the firm that finally, hired me was Tungsten Sportswear. The owner, the co-owner of that company, hired me on. His name was Lou Detz. I was just indebted to him because he took me on, and this allowed me to at least begin my education and finance my education, of course, at Mitchell College. So that was my turning point, knowing how I was going to overcome the learning process in order to better myself and promote, a life for me that would be worth living.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to sprinkle a couple of things in here and weave Merle Smith in. For Lonnie, I want to sprinkle in the radio, which if you go to the exhibit, you'll see the radio. And the radio was Lonnie's gateway to the world. And he always heard about Connecticut as a place where things got done. So he came to Connecticut because that was the state that things got done. With Florence, I want to add that, and all four of the people are connected to the military. I want to add that the people she grew up with told her to never marry somebody shorter than her. She ended up marrying somebody who fit into a submarine, which is how she got here. And with Donetta, there's a story that we're not going to be able to weave in too much, but her father was interested in buying property and did buy property. And to this day, I think Donetta still owns some property that her father might have bought, but he faced the issue of redlining in New London. There were properties he was able to buy and properties he wasn't able to buy. And I think Lonnie himself faced issues with redlining in New London. Now I'm going to ask you a more difficult question. What was the most serious setback or the most demoralizing moment to you, either in your young adult life or in your adult life, in relation to race and discrimination and what you were trying to accomplish? Lonnie?
Oh, I'd have to think about that for a while. When I think about demoralizing, I think I've been hurt pretty bad, but I don't think I've ever been demoralized.
Okay.
I think the way that I was raised with a bit of grit and tenacity, that you could never demoralize me. You could hurt me, but as long as you didn't kill and dismember me and leave me where the pieces get back together, you should watch out.
They put you on the ground and you run.
That's what my father always said. You drop me off anywhere, I'll hit the ground running.
Right. What was the most hurtful thing then?
The most hurtful thing. I can say I was hurt in my adult life after a 17-year trek of working and struggling and sacrificing and doing all kinds of crazy stuff to finally get through law school. Then find out after all those years that I'm dyslexic and ADD, and then taking the bar exam like it was my second profession, passing that, working in court, and having judges mistake me for the defendant. That was a little painful. You know, and the crazy part was the person with me wasn't a person of color, nor were they in a suit. But again, it's one of those cases where you can spend the time, I guess, being demoralized, or you can spend the time educating and pushing forward. And change will not come about because you want it. Change will come about because you make it. And
so to make it clear to everybody, Lonnie appeared, I know once, perhaps twice, in front of a judge as an attorney, and the judge assumed he was the defendant.
This is both on the state and federal level. So sometimes people say justice is blind. I believe she peeked.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Florence?
Um,
Hurtful or demoralizing?
Hurtful. Here I am, just graduated from South Carolina State College. I have already been interviewed for a teaching job, got accepted. I'm going to start in August. So the first thing I said to myself, the first civic thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and register to vote. When I went to the registrar's office, naturally the registrar was white. She said to me that in order for me as a colored person, I would either have to pay poll tax or read a section of the Constitution of the state of South Carolina and interpret it to her. Well, I didn't have any money to pay poll tax. I just graduated from college. I'm broke. So I chose to read. But what that to me, well, I'll tell you, let me finish this. So I chose to read the Constitution. However, I deliberately misread the Constitution. And the registrar had no idea that I had misread, which says to me that she couldn't read, not alone understanding the Constitution. But that to me was heartless. And then I agree with Lonnie when he said that there's not too much that could have demoralized me, because after losing both parents and then having to try to figure out a way, how am I going to do this thing? How is my life going to be? There was nothing that could demoralize me at that moment. But that setback of trying to vote and couldn't with the barriers. And unfortunately, they may not say to you today that you have to pay poll tax. And they may not ask you to read the Constitution of the state, but there are barriers that are still being set up. So
voter suppression.
Yes.
Voter suppression is
Yes.
still a big issue.
Yes.
Donetta, setback, demoralizing. your college admission and then the housing issue?
Yes, although it wasn't so much demoralizing as I wouldn't describe it that way. It was hurtful because I had these plans, and
Tell everybody what happened.
I had applied to a school here in Connecticut, and I had been accepted, and I was just so happy about it that I really didn't share it right away, though. You know, most of the time you go out exploding, because you're happy and you really want to share it with everybody. But my holdback was, okay, I'm over the first hurdle. But then I received correspondence requesting a photo of me. And that's when things started to get rough for me, because now I'm later told that although this school had just completed building a brand new dormitories, that I would have to find housing off campus. That was sort of demoralizing, although I don't know if I'd take it that far. But I'm glad I hadn't talked to a lot of people about the acceptance, because now I can't go and stay on the college campus. But it was hurtful. And of course, with the school, building brand new campus and dormitories, it just made no sense. So that's pretty much, but I found a way to overcome that. I think the most demoralizing things that have ever happened in my life occurred in foster home. That was an experience that I don't even like to share because of how it parted the family. My sister and I, my brother and I, our lives were interrupted by the type of scolding that we received. And I often wondered why this individual that was raising us acted the way she did. But then later found out that during my parents' divorce, she was more or less forced to tell, my dad had threatened her. If she did not take on the children, that he would report her actions relating to playing the numbers, as they call it. If the state wasn't getting a part of that, then, you were into a lot of trouble. So she took us on, and she really divided us divided the children the way she treated us. I got most of the labor work done. My sister, because of her complexion, got less of the work done. And I say that because this woman was a dark-complected woman, and she really had no use for people who were fair-skinned. I mean, this was another taught thing throughout, this racism. You separate, this was Jim Crow, you separate the light skins from the dark skins. The light skins work in the kitchen, the dark ones out into the fields. And so part of that is what I realized later in life that I was experiencing. But I survived it and never let anything really keep me back. I just keep forging ahead.
Okay. We're gonna talk a little bit now about what you're most anxious about today. For your country, for your children, for your grandchildren, for your siblings. What is the one or two things that you're most nervous about, most anxious about? You could speak on behalf of our community or our city or our state or our country, or you could just speak about it very personally. But what's bugging you right now, Lonnie?
Oh God, I don't want to chew up all the time. The thing that makes me anxious today is this rapid move backwards.
Yeah.
I love history and I love science, and I was a geek before it was popular. And over 1,000 years ago, the Chinese had the best science They had the way of the world. They were the leaders. And then came the Ottomans, who made their way to the footsteps of Europe. And each of those civilizations, each of those cultures had a few things that bound them together to make them move forward. Competition, science, and medicine. With the sciences, you could move ahead with inventions. With the medicines, you could actually extend the life of people to the point they wouldn't die before they could teach someone else something they knew. And with competition, you would make businesses and people want to go afar to learn and trade and share with other people. And so now I look around and all of a sudden we are turning our backs on science. We're turning our back on competition. We're turning our back on medicine. And then we're adopting a backwards look and using a lot of isms, racism, sexism, whatever. And we are starting to behave as if we can put ourselves and take the rest of the world back to the 40s or 50s. It's a nice thought, but the rest of the world isn't going to go with us. So we have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren who are going to be in a world that's going to look nothing like the world that we had. And when we look back and we talk about the good old days, I'm sure none of the people on this panel would say, let's go back there to those good old days. They were very painful. They were horrible in a sense. It's nice to reminisce, but it's almost like going to heaven. Everybody wants to go, but nobody wants to die. You know, so I think that we need to have a rethinking and actually take some of the blinders off and look at the world as it really is today. That a lot of the countries that didn't even exist a mere 50 years ago at the end of World War II are pretty powerful countries today. Their people have as much worth as our people. And if we start devaluing our neighbor, we're really devaluing ourselves. And my father had a statement that he would always remind me of. He would say, you can't move with your foot on my neck. You are trapped too. So if we want to move forward and really go someplace and really be the country that we claim and be that shining light or city on the hill, I think we need to look ahead, look to the future, not to the past. And it makes me anxious when we are kind of looking back.
Florence?
What I am most anxious about today is the spirit that's in this country. I totally agree with what all that Lonnie has said. I don't want to go back, but we are going back. And I remember when I was doing the civil rights bill, like, the civil marching and demonstrating, and I'm saying I'm doing this so that my kids wouldn't have to go through this. I don't want them to have to sit on the back of the bus. I don't want to go back to Jim Crow. But people today are pushing us back, and that was not a pleasant experience for me. Growing up, when you were told that you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't find any contributions that people who look like me, who were kin to me, they didn't do anything to help build this country. I couldn't find anything in a history book. I couldn't find literature. But the teachers that I had, though, were really, really sharp, and they put their lives on the line for teaching us Black history. And they had to do that to give us a sense of worth. And now we spend all this time trying to tell our kids that they are worth. My grandmother had said something to me very early, and it helped me to move forward in life. She said to me that you're not better. No, nobody is better than you. That's one of the things that kept my feet on the ground. No, but I knew that if I was going to become somebody, achieve anything, I had to be smarter, work harder, read more books. If somebody was told to read one, I would read 2 and 3. because we were told that we had to be better. And now for somebody to say that what I grew up with in the South, the segregated South, the Jim Crow South, and they're telling me that the people now, they are a good people, I can't buy that. I am literally numb. Every time I hear of someone dying, I am numb. It seems like every time a scab begins to cover up the wound, something happened and it snatches the scab right off and you start bleeding again. You start crying again. When is this thing going to end? And so I'm worried about the spirit of divisiveness. People don't know me or are judging me. I'm walking on my street to exercise, and this woman walks up to me. She saw me walking in one direction. I had an encounter with a Karen. She saw me walking in one direction. I was walking towards going downtown, and I turned and I was walking back, coming back to close to the beach. She stopped me with her cute little dog, and she says, "You're walking." And I'm saying, how ridiculous a question that is. Yes, I'm walking, and I'm walking for my health. So she said, "Well, I saw you on the other street. Now you're going the other way. Where do you live?" What? Where do you live? And I'm not talking about last year. I'm talking about last month. Or I am in a situation, I'm in a place, in a venue where I'm thinking it is safe. I had something in common with most of the people. In fact, all of the people that were in the room. And this lady, and I'm going to call her lady, I respect her because of her age, and I'm probably as old as she is, but she waited until everyone had left the area. She came over to me and said to me, "Don't wear black. Don't you wear black." I'm a preacher, so I'm really lost for words now. I didn't have a chapter or verse that I could respond to that. But I knew something was coming after that, so I was quiet. I mean, I was stunned. Her next statement was, "Because when you wear black, you disappear." And it was a white lady who said that to me. And I'm not talking about in South Carolina. I'm talking about right in this area, not in New London, but in one of the surrounding towns, and I'm not going to name it, but that shook me to my core to think that stuff's behind me. No, it's present, it's alive, and it's doing well. And if it was dead, folks have gone back and resurrected.
Donetta, anxious.
Oh, I think there definitely needs to be a healing, starting with the leadership at the top, and I'll kind of leave it there. We all want the same things. We want true leadership, good jobs, healthcare, education, freedom of religion. We want our homes and good education for our children, police protection versus police injury and killings, and more gun control so that we have the ability to live where we're able to afford to live. And I think those are the kinds of things that trouble me daily. I have 6 grandchildren. The 3 oldest are now in college. The oldest child is in her last year. She's going to Virginia Commonwealth University. The second one is going to UVA, and then my grandson is going to the University of Maryland. The problem I have with all 3 of them, of course, is the fact that the girls have chosen a field of study which is interesting. And I think it just depicts who they are. They want to be the next level. They're in nursing, but they want to take graduate courses and do more of that sort of thing, step down, nurse practitioners, I think they're called. And the oldest grandchild just recently tested positive. And this was following her required coursework that she had to do at the hospital. Of course, it scared the living dickens out of all of us, I guess, but she survived that. She went through it quite well, and I just hope there's no lingering effects. And of course, now I wait for when my second granddaughter has to do clinicals, whether this terrible disease, this COVID will still be around. She's in her junior year. And then of course, my grandson is going to school in Maryland, where there's a lot of racial incidents. I mean, someone, can walk up to you and just shoot you dead. So it's scary times. And I really believe that we have to be diligent about speaking out about these type of things. There is a cost probably to be paid, but it may help others to survive. I think of what has been happening, or what has happened at the border. This is devastating. I cannot believe another human being or beings can do the kinds of things that they have to women and children, not to mention the men. So I worry about where we go from here. And I can only pray that we'll come under new leadership, and that will be half of what we need in order to get through this. The rest is going to be hard because it's embedded. It's embedded in some folks to be who they are. And to keep minorities and people of color from achieving anything more than them is a real issue. And I don't mind saying, I have friends who are of color and who are white, and I hold them all dear to myself, my being. I don't understand how people can go to a church and call themselves, I don't know, a Christian. You cannot do that. But that is where I am with this. And
So
I just pray that
I want to wrap it up
we'll see a better life.
to some degree, and I'm going to go in reverse now. I'll end with Lonnie, but Donetta, I want you to share with everybody the feeling you had when you went to a demonstration in Waterford after George Floyd was killed.
I was amazed.
You were amazed, but
I was amazed.
I know.
I could not believe.
Wait, I want them to understand something, so I'm going to tell them simply this. When Donetta moved into Waterford, into the Ostrobacci neighborhood, she encountered active racial hostility. Now fast forward to a few months ago, after the tragedy of George Floyd, and there's a demonstration called in Waterford. Tell them what you felt like, Donetta.
I have never participated in a group like that before this one. The white children and people who were out to support what had happened to Floyd and Breonna, and they were louder than the handful of Blacks and people of color that attended the march. We marched from the Clark Lane School down to the city complex in Waterford. And there's hope, because these white kids that participated meant what they were saying. They were shouting aloud, Floyd's name and Breonna's name and Black Lives Matters. And I was just dumbfounded. They made more noise than me, and I can make a lot of noise. And I was just so happy to be part of it. It made me realize a change is inevitable. It's gonna come. I just hope I'm around to see it. because the young people today, they don't stand for a lot of this stuff based on what I'm seeing. And it's got to be, you know, it's not embedded in them. And I believe that there's going to be a change. I just hope I live long enough to see it.
Florence, something hopeful or inspiring for the end of this talk?
Sherry, I think that what we're doing in encountering differences is going to make a difference. First, I want people to not judge me and don't know me. And if even if you know me, don't judge me, because there's still a lot of work left to be done. I think there needs to and there has to be conversation about racism and facing the truth that either you are a racist or you're not. I think one of the things that astonished me my first year working with the group of 5 kids, 2 African Americans and 3 were white. They were going to the same schools, but they had no connection. It was like they didn't even know each other. But one thing that I was astounded when one of the young ladies said to me that she didn't realize that there was a race problem. And here's the reason why she said. She said because she thought racism had ended when Barack Obama became president, and little did she know that that's when it really kicked up. That astonished me. So that's why I'm so happy the kids come in my home. They see where I live, who I am, my conversation, what I went through to get where I am now. And I want to continue to do that. But I think not only the kids need to do that, because personally, I believe if we leave the kids alone, if the adults would leave the kids alone, the kids will work it out and do a better job than we as adults are doing, because we're still hashing over the same thing. You don't look like me. You don't drive what I drive. You don't have what I have in the bank. You don't live where I am. I'll tell you a simple incident and then I'll be done. For people judging you, I belong to an organization, and one day we'd had a rainstorm, and normally downtown Bank Street would be the first place to flood. So I sat down to have my lunch, and this person who sat down next to me said, "How did you make out with the flood?" "What in the heck are you talking about? You talking about Noah? I can tell you a little something about Noah." He said, "No." He said, the flooding that was downtown. He simply assumed because I was Black, I lived in the downtown area, and he thought that I should know everything about what had happened with the flooding on Bank Street. But let me tell you about how things can turn around. That same person I needed to bring me home one day because my car was not working. One of the members took me, and she asked this particular person, and she didn't even know what she was doing, to drop me off. And when he found out where I lived, so chagrined. He didn't even, I don't think he even said goodbye. I said, "Thank you." I don't think he was shocked, but he had assumed all Black people live down there. So this is what we're still dealing with. And I think the more, we used to sing a song when we were kids, and I know it's probably childish. Getting to know you, getting to know all about you. We need to go back to that and stop assuming. That goes for me as an African American. It goes for my white brothers and sisters. We need to stop assuming and get to know each other and face the truth, the prejudices, and the biases that are in all of us.
Lonnie?
Oh, wow. You know, just anything you don't know, human nature says you fear it. And we fear a lot about each other. And I had an interesting experience because I spent 4 years living in New Hampshire, and I had a store. And it was most interesting because I have people will come into my store and talk to me, and they would tell me, I know all about Black people. And I would say, how? I watch TV. And if that's how you know, what a skewed view. And unfortunately, that's what was going on with movies and stereotypical things going on and TV shows, what have you. That's where people got their knowledge. But when encountering differences came along, it gave people to have a firsthand, hands-on, personal feeling with someone else. And it's been beneficial not only to those kids, but to us as well.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this because I actually ran into one of the persons who had been in one of the groups I talked to. And I think they're missionaries, that they're actual little missionaries that are walking around out there expressing things that if I were to try and express it to some of the people they talk to, they wouldn't hear me, but they hear those kids. So they're making a major difference. And that's something that will be a legacy that will last long after we are gone. But one of the things that's really changing in this country, and it is not going to be stopped. When Trayvon Martin was killed, there was a large outcry. But prior to Trayvon Martin being killed, there were a lot of other Black young men who had been killed. Their families were in pain, their friends were in pain, but the country wasn't. But what happened from the 50s, the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, but all of a sudden in the early 2000s, was that at Thanksgiving dinner, there were Trayvon Martin sitting at a lot of tables. Tables that 50 years before he or she never would have sat at. Because that's some person with European descent, grandson or granddaughter. Now, they may not have a deep affinity for people of color, but they do not want you hurting their grandson or granddaughter. So now they have a vested interest. Now they're learning things up close and personal. I have a very dear friend who I talk to every day, and we exchange ideas about this because he has a granddaughter that is now an adult. And he would share with me, she's almost 30 years old, the things that were said to him when they were out as a group and they had this child with them. And if you have a personal experience with something, it's totally different than reading about it. In this country, for all of its shortcomings, is still a great place.
Yeah.
And that statement that we like to make about my country, right or wrong, we don't have the complete statement. It's my country, right or wrong, but when wrong, fix it. It's time for us to fix it. And we're not doing a good job at fixing it right now. We're doing a good job of hiding from a lot of stuff, of blaming people for a lot of stuff. And the people who get blamed are the ones who don't have a voice, who don't have access to the microphone. They are in the old days, we knew who the victim was and we knew who the perpetrator was. And no matter what the perpetrator said, the victim knew he was a victim or she was a victim. Now we're at a point where the victim has started to believe that they're the perpetrator because the perpetrator says they are. And we should never be in a position of trying to determine if people are entitled to grace. If you are entitled to grace, we will treat you fairly. If you're entitled to grace, you can live here. Well, if you are born here, you're a person here, and the Constitution guarantees you certain things, that's all the grace you should need.
Well, I want to thank you all for participating tonight. It was a wonderful discussion. We didn't have time for questions. If anybody in the audience has a question, email Lori at Grua Center and she'll forward the questions on to me and I will distribute them out to the participants. Lonnie, Florence, Donetta, thank you so much. I know this is the third time you've done it, but you do it terrifically every time. And I'm sure everybody appreciates it. Lori, I'm handing it back to you.
And let me add my thanks to you as well. And I want to remind our audience that because of the COVID era, we're doing something different at La Grua. We're going to have dedicated gallery hours to see this exhibition on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Through mid-December, excepting holidays and holiday weekends, or by appointment. If you call us and that doesn't suit your schedule, we'll try to arrange another time for you. So thank you to all of you in the audience for joining us. But once again, Lonnie and Florence and Donetta, thank you so much for your candor and your generosity of time and spirit in helping us on this journey to become a less racist society. This is so important. Thank you so much, everyone, and good night to all of you.